I've lived in Pine Hollow my whole life. It's the kind of town where everybody knows everybody, and nothing much ever changes. We've got one gas station, one diner, and one claim to fame: UFO sightings. The stories go back decades. Farmers swear they've seen strange lights hovering over their fields. Hunters talk about missing time in the woods. There's even an old rumor about the mayor's father disappearing for a week and coming back with no memory of where he'd been. I never bought into any of it. People get bored in small towns. They tell stories to pass the time. That's what I thought anyway. It wasn't until last night that I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's something to it. Yesterday started like any other. I worked a late shift at the gas station, locking up around 11. It was a quiet night, just a couple of regulars stopping in for cigarettes and coffee. I was dead tired, but I always enjoy the drive home. There's something peaceful about the empty roads at night, the way the moonlight spills across the fields. My route takes me down Old Hollow Road, a straight shot past the woods. No traffic lights, no street lights, just darkness and the occasional flash of a deer's eyes in the trees. I've driven that road 1,000 times without a second thought, but last night felt different. I noticed it as soon as I turned onto the road. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, even though the sky was clear. There was this faint hum, just on the edge of hearing, like the sound power lines make when you stand too close. At first, I ignored it. It was probably just my imagination, or maybe I was more tired than I realized. But as I drove, the hum got louder. Not painfully loud, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And that's when I saw the light. It was hovering above the tree line, a pale blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield, trying to figure out what it was. A helicopter? A drone? But it didn't move like either of those things. It was completely still, hanging in the air like it was watching me. I don't know why I didn't just keep driving. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Either way, I stopped the car and got out. The hum was louder now, vibrating in my chest. The light seemed closer, though I couldn't remember it moving. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't look away. It was beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way. And then it blinked. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. The hum stopped. Everything went dead silent. No crickets, no wind, not even the sound of my own breathing. The last thing I remember is feeling weightless, like I was floating. Then, nothing. When I woke up, I was still in my car, parked on the side of the road. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The clock on the dashboard read 3:47 a.m. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The drive home should have taken 20 minutes. Somehow, I'd lost over 4 hours. I sat there in the driver's seat, staring at the clock, trying to will it to make sense. 4 hours, gone. My first thought was that I must have fallen asleep. It wasn't impossible. I'd been tired all day. Maybe I'd pulled over and dozed off without realizing it. But when I looked around, nothing added up. The road was empty, just like before. But my car wasn't where I'd stopped. I was parked at an angle, half on the shoulder, half in the weeds. My headlights were still on, but the battery light on the dash was blinking. The engine wasn't running. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see my reflection, but all I saw was darkness. It wasn't just the road behind me. The woods, the sky, everything was swallowed in black. The thought hit me like a punch. What if I'm not alone out here? My hands trembled as I reached for the ignition. The car sputtered to life, and the headlights cut through the dark like a lifeline. I hit the gas, not caring about the speed limit, just needing to get home. By the time I reached my house, the sun was starting to rise, casting a pale light over the town. I stumbled inside, locked the door, and collapsed on the couch. Sleep should have come easy after a night like that, but my mind wouldn't let go. The gaps in my memory felt like missing puzzle pieces, teasing me with the edges of something I couldn't quite see. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, bright light, shadows moving, the hum that still lingered in my ears. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't stop myself. If I'd fallen asleep, where were the marks of time? No empty coffee cups, no wrappers in the car. And why did I feel so drained? When I finally slept, it wasn't peaceful. I dreamt of being pulled upward, the ground vanishing beneath me. Cold air burned my skin as something metallic closed around me, suffocating and sterile. Shapes moved in the periphery, just beyond the reach of understanding. I woke with a start, gasping for air. It was mid-afternoon. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Texts from friends asking where I'd been. One caught my attention. It was from a coworker. 4 words. Did you see it? The message sat there on my phone, pulsing in my hand like a heartbeat. Did you see it? I stared at it for a long time before typing back. See what? The reply came almost instantly. The light. Everyone's talking about it. A chill ran through me. I hadn't told anyone what happened, hadn't said a word about the light or the missing hours. But if others had seen it, maybe I wasn't going crazy. I fired off another text asking what they meant, but the response never came. After a few minutes of waiting, I threw on a jacket and headed to the diner. If there was gossip in Pine Hollow, it would be there. The diner was unusually quiet for a Saturday afternoon. A few regulars sat in their usual spots, drinking coffee and staring out the windows. The waitress, Molly, looked up as I walked in. "You hear about last night?" she asked, handing me a mug before I could even sit down. "Yeah, kind of," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's everyone saying?" She leaned in, lowering her voice. There was a light over Old Hollow Road, big, bright, weird. couple of folks said their power went out around the same time. Charlie swears his cows broke through the fence trying to get away from it. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Anybody else see anything unusual? She hesitated, glancing around before answering. Don't laugh, but some people said they felt weird after. Headaches ringing in their ears, like they were being watched. I forced a smile. Sounds like the usual UFO stories. Molly didn't laugh. On the walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just what Molly said, it was everything. The way people avoided eye contact, the way the birds seemed quieter than usual. Even the air smelled off, metallic and sharp, like the inside of a battery. At home, I threw my jacket onto the couch and noticed something I hadn't before. My keys. The metal keychain was scuffed and scratched, as if it had been dragged across something rough. I tried to ignore it, but the dreams came back that night. They weren't like normal dreams, fuzzy and abstract. These were sharp, vivid. I could feel the cold metal beneath my fingers, hear the hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But what scared me most wasn't the dreams. It was what I found on my phone the next morning. There was a photo in my camera roll I didn't recognize. Blurry, dark, but unmistakable. A pale blue light, framed by what looked like the inside of a room I'd never seen before. I stared at the photo, trying to make sense of it. The room in the picture was wrong, too smooth, too clean. The walls had no seams, no corners, just a cold metallic curve that disappeared into shadows. I didn't remember taking it. I didn't even remember opening my camera. But there it was, undeniable proof that something had happened during those lost hours. The logical thing would have been to delete it, to bury it with all the other unanswered questions from last night. But I couldn't. Instead, I found myself tracing the edges of the light in the photo, my mind racing with possibilities. What was I looking at? A ship? A lab? I didn't have answers, but I knew where to start looking. The Pine Hollow Library wasn't much. A single room with shelves that sagged under the weight of old, forgotten books. But it had one thing I needed: archives. In the back corner, under flickering fluorescent lights, I dug through yellowed newspapers and grainy microfilm. At first, it was the usual small-town oddities. A barn fire in '78, a string of missing pets in the early '90s. But then I found the stories. There were dozens of them, scattered across decades. Reports of strange lights, loud hums, and people who swore they'd lost hours, sometimes days. One article stood out. Local farmer missing for a week, returns with no memory. The headline was dated 50 years ago, but the details were eerily familiar. The man described a blinding light, an overwhelming hum, and waking up in a place he didn't recognize. The article ended with a chilling quote. "They let me go, but they'll come back. They always come back." By the time I left the library, the sun was setting, painting the town in shades of orange and red. The air felt heavier than before. like something unseen was pressing down on me. On the walk home, I passed Mrs. Green's garden. She was out there every evening, tending to her roses, but tonight she was standing perfectly still, staring at the sky. "Mrs. Green," I called. She didn't answer. Her face was blank, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I followed her gaze but found nothing unusual, just the same old sky fading into twilight. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. When I got home, I locked the door and pulled the curtain shut. The photo still sat on my phone, burning a hole in my mind. I wanted to believe it was just some trick of light, a glitch. But deep down, I knew better. That night I dreamed again. But this time I didn't wake up screaming. I woke up outside. I woke up in my front yard, barefoot, my clothes damp from the dew. For a moment I thought I was still dreaming. The world felt off. The silence was too thick, and the air smelled faintly of something chemical like burnt plastic. I stumbled back inside, locking the door behind me. My heart was racing, my skin clammy. How did I get out there? I checked the windows, the locks. Everything was secure. There was no sign I'd left through the front door. The hum came back then, faint but unmistakable, buzzing in my ears. By mid-morning, my unease had turned to determination. I needed answers. I went back to the photo on my phone, zooming in on every corner, searching for something, anything that might explain it. That's when I noticed the faint reflection of a figure in the glow. It wasn't clear, just a vague outline, but it was enough to make my stomach turn. I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my jacket and set out for Old Hollow Road. The woods felt different in the daylight. The trees swayed in the breeze, their branches creaking like old doors, but the quiet was still there, unnatural and heavy. I walked the stretch of road where I'd first seen the light, scanning the ground for any sign of what had happened. At first, there was nothing, just dirt and fallen leaves, but then I saw it, a patch of earth that was scorched black, as if it had been struck by lightning. In the center of the burned ground was something small and metallic, half buried in the dirt. I crouched down, brushing the soil away. It was a coin-sized disc, smooth and featureless except for a faint glow at its center. The hum grew louder as I held it, vibrating through my fingertips. I felt an overwhelming urge to drop it, to leave it behind. But I couldn't. I slipped it into my pocket and hurried home, every instinct screaming at me to look over my shoulder. Back in my living room, I studied the disc under a desk lamp. The glow pulsed faintly, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. When I touched it again, a memory surfaced, not clear, but sharp and sudden. A room of smooth, curved walls, a cold table beneath me, and shapes, humanoid but wrong, moving in the light. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't just dreaming. I wasn't imagining things. They were real. That night, as I lay in bed, clutching the disc, the hum grew louder again, and with it came the faint glow of light creeping through my window. They were back. The light came again, pulsing blue and steady, flooding my room in its cold glow. The hum was everywhere now, rattling my thoughts, making it impossible to think straight. I couldn't look away. My body felt heavy, like something unseen was pressing me down into the mattress, but my mind was screaming to move, to run. Then the light blinked. For a split second, I was plunged into darkness. But when it returned, I wasn't in my room anymore. The air was cold and sterile, with a faint chemical tang that burned in my nostrils. The floor beneath me was smooth and reflective, stretching out into an endless curve. The light, always that pulsing blue, seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I wasn't alone. Shapes moved in the periphery, tall and wrong, their limbs too long and too fluid. They didn't approach, they didn't have to. My body was frozen, but my mind was alive with panic. I turned, and that's when I saw it. The wall ahead wasn't a wall at all. It was a window. A massive pane of flawless glass stretching endlessly in all directions. Beyond it was Pine Hollow. The entire town was laid out below me, impossibly small. The houses, the diner, the gas station, all of it perfectly preserved, sitting in the center of a vast, barren wasteland. The kind of landscape you'd see on Mars: red sand, jagged rocks, no sky. Just the endless, empty expanse of alien terrain. I stepped closer, my knees weak, my breath fogging the glass. My heart pounded as I watched tiny people moving through the streets, repeating their daily routines on an endless loop, and that's when it hit me. We weren't on Earth. We never had been. Pine Hollow wasn't a town. It was a terrarium on an alien planet. I staggered back, the pulsing light growing brighter and faster, matching the frantic beat of my heart. Behind me, the figures shifted, their spindly forms closing in, but I couldn't look away from the glass, from the horrible truth staring back at me. This was all we were. Their experiment. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please do subscribe. It's so important to enable me to create more of these original stories. I release a brand new story every Friday, and all of my stories are exclusive to Night Tales Creepypasta. Also, check out my Patreon for ad-free episodes and early access. Night Tales Creepypasta is also a podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, and all major podcast platforms. See you next time.